Welcome to the channel. Today I'm going to walk you through how to install the Windows Subsystem for Linux and then install NeoVim. Some of you are stuck using Windows, and if anyone of you has been following this channel, then you'll know that I am a Linux user. I never use Windows, but I do appreciate that from time to time perhaps your employer doesn't allow you to use Linux, or for whatever reason your university mandates that you need to use Windows, or you're a boomer and you're not even aware of other operating systems. Whatever the reason, you may be forced to use Windows, but it's not the end of the world because we can install WSL or Windows Subsystem for Linux, and we can then use that and install NeoVim on it. And that can then be the area in which we develop our software, and we can use all the Vim bindings and all the Linux commands. Now, just quickly, what is WSL? Well, it allows you to run a Linux environment on your Windows machine, but it circumvents the need to install that Linux operating system. So on a dual boot, so you'd have to separately boot into your Linux environment or otherwise use a virtual machine. And so it's a much easier, more accessible, and especially for beginners, a great way to get introduced to Linux. Let's proceed. We're going to install this on our machine, get the WSL set up, and then we're going to install NeoVim and have a basic configuration. Before we install WSL, let's just have a look at some of the basic commands. And on the right hand side, you'll see that I've opened PowerShell. You can access that by going down to your search bar and searching for PowerShell. And you should see a similar terminal emulator come up here, and it should have your C drive and then users and then your username. So just go ahead and open that up. And then the first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to look at the list command, because we want to see what are the available distributions for use with WSL. So I'm going to run this command down here. It's WSL list online. And we can see we've got a few flavors, although a very limited set of distribution options: Ubuntu, Debian, Kali, which is also Ubuntu based, and then OpenSUSE. So if you're an Arch user, you're going to be disappointed, or Fedora. Tutorial, I'm going to go ahead and use Ubuntu. So what we're going to do is we're going to install Ubuntu onto the machine, and the way that we're going to do that is using the WSL install command and then provide the distribution flag. Now, I do believe that Ubuntu is the default, but we want to specifically use the latest version of Ubuntu. That's 24.04 that is available here. So I'm just going to clear the screen. You can do that with Control L, and then go ahead and we're going to say WSL install, and then we can pass in the distribution, and we're going to say Ubuntu (24.04). Now this is a considerably large download. It may take a fair amount of time, so let's circle back once your installation is done. All right, after a little bit, you're going to be presented with some logging, which says that your Ubuntu 24.04 long-term stable is launching because it's been installed, and then it's going to prompt you to create a default Unix user account. And so this is going to be your sudo account or your superdoer, your admin account. Go ahead and create a username. I'm just going to use the same one that I use on all of my systems. And then it'll prompt you to create a password. And the install is now successful. So we can now see that we are actually running in, you've seen that the prompt has changed, and we can now see we've got rad xmg. We've got this kind of bash prompt. We can see that this is bash as denoted by the $. Now, by running the cat command, which is simply going to log out the information in this file, and then followed by etc and then os release, we can see the version of Linux that we're actually running here in this terminal emulator. As expected, we've just installed Ubuntu 24.04, and it's giving us some information just to confirm that we've got the correct operating system installed in here. We can also say something like shell. If we were to echo your shell, we can see that by default we're using bash. So we're going to be making a few configuration changes with respect to this installation of Ubuntu, but fundamentally this is similar to installing Ubuntu on your machine as a dual boot or in a virtual machine. We've got the same commands, we've got the same file structure as we do in those other avenues that you can take. Until now, we've just been using the default terminal emulator in Windows, and we were originally using PowerShell to install WSL Ubuntu, and then you saw that the fonts, when we did cat etc OS release, everything was looking a little bit funny. What I would recommend is that if you want to use the Ubuntu WSL on your Windows system, then you're better off changing to another terminal emulator aside from the default. And so we can do that by going to the Microsoft Store and then searching for Windows Terminal. In here, you'll see the Windows Terminal, and you can click on that and simply hit install. Now we can simply go ahead and open it. I'm going to close the Microsoft Store. And so its appearance is slightly different. It's got these rounded corners. However, we're still in the Windows PowerShell because by default, this is what this Windows is telling the Windows terminal, that this is the shell that we want to run. Now, we don't want to do that. That's the whole point of this tutorial, because we want to use the WSL Linux system. So we're going to go to our settings, and you can do that with Control, comma, or hitting that drop down and then going to settings. And then under the default profile, rather than using Windows PowerShell, we're going to use Ubuntu 24.04, the long-term stable version that we just installed a moment ago. Now, while you're there, you might as well go and change the default terminal application. Rather than the Windows host console default, I would change that to the Windows terminal. Save that. Now, on the left-hand side, you're going to see there's some options around appearance. If we go to our defaults here, then we can also change our font. And so I'm going to choose a font which, all of these are mono fonts which are installed by default by the Windows terminal. You can choose any one that you like. In this case, I'm going to simply stick with the Ubuntu mono nerd font. You can also change your default theme in here. So perhaps I'll change that to Tango Dark. And as well, you can go ahead and change transparency, which I'm going to set to 80%. All right, so we can close that Windows PowerShell session and we can create a new Ubuntu session. Because we've set it as default, when we click new session, you're going to get the Ubuntu shell. And now we're back where we were before, but now we're in a different terminal emulator. And as you can see, these fonts look a little bit nicer. So if we were to run the same command now, we can say cat and then etc and then OS release. You can see it all looks a little bit nicer. Now, just before we step into installing NeoVim, it's important to note that Ubuntu here uses the same file system as Linux systems broadly use. But you may be wondering, how does this interact, or how can you view your Windows files? Because let's say, for example, if we go to our root directory, we can see that we've got a number of familiar, if you've been working with Linux, you've got your bin directory, you've got etc, boot, dev, you've got tmp, universal system resources, sys. So a lot of this stuff is going to be looking pretty familiar. But in order to access your Windows system, you will need to go to your MNT, where your Windows system is going to be mounted here. So we can simply go to MNT, and here we can just ls. We can see all of our drives. So we've got the C drive, D drive in my case. So let's say you want to go and you want to change to your C drive. You can simply go in there, and in here you're going to see, well, in my case, I've got some files and so forth, but this is your C drive, and you can peruse this as you would like. So just an important point when you're interacting between the WSL and your Windows system. All right, things are starting to look pretty good. On the right-hand side, we're now using the Windows terminal, and inside of that terminal emulator, we can see that we are running the WSL Ubuntu version, and so we've installed that. That's all set up. Now on the left-hand side is the home page of NeoVim, and NeoVim is a fork of Vim, If you're not familiar with the Vim motions or the Vim or NeoVim projects, you really need to familiarize yourself, because using them is going to exponentially improve your productivity and your workflow and your enjoyment of your work. We're going to install NeoVim into our WSL Ubuntu system that we've set up. But first, what we need to do is we need to prepare our system. Now, anytime we want to install something on Ubuntu, or really if you were using Arch, you would also want to update your system. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to say sudo and then apt update. And this is just going to update the system to make sure that everything is ready. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say sudo apt install, and we need this libfuse2. Without this package, our NeoVim app image that we're going to be setting up isn't going to work. So it's important that you don't skip this step. Go ahead and run this command. It's going to install the libfuse2. As you can see, I've already got it installed on my machine, but in your case, it's going to confirm that that's been installed. Now, Control L, you can clear that. And let's go to the Install Now section of NeoVim. In here, scroll down. We've got different options for Windows and Mac OS until you get to the Linux version. And specifically, we're looking for the app image section. App images are just pre-packaged executables. So you can use this on any Linux system. It's not specific to Arch or Ubuntu or Fedora. And the version that we want, and the reason that I'm doing it this way, is that your system, specifically and especially for Debian or Ubuntu based systems, might not have the latest versions or may not even have the NeoVim package available. This way we get the app image, which is the latest stable version or the latest non-pre-release version of NeoVim, and we can install that. And because this is a rapidly developing project, NeoVim, and it's a community that's seen massive gains and a lot of activity in the last few years, we always want to use the latest stable version. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this first line and I'll explain what it does. Now, we're in the home directory, so if just to show you once again, if we run this command pwd, you should see /home/ your username. If you're not there, you can always do cd and then tilde, and it'll take you to that home directory. Now I'm going to paste in that curl command, and what this is going to do, this is going to download, and it's telling it download, no redirects, and specifically take this file at this URL, so github.com, trust that, the NeoVim GitHub repository, the latest release, the downloadable version, and this is the NVim app image. Hit enter, and it's a small file. It's only 11.8 megabytes, so it's going to be pretty quick. You should see it down there. And now if we were to run ls, you'll see we've still got the original nerd fonts file, and next to it, we've got the nvim.app image. So you should be seeing that there in your home directory. Now, just while we're here, we'll do a bit of cleaning up at the end. So now, what we need to do is we need to make this app image executable. If we run ls and then la and then nvim app image, we'll see that it's read and writable for super users and then readable for other users and groups. We want to make it so that it's an executable, because right now, if we were to say nvim and app image, it's going to say permission denied. We can't actually execute and open this program. So the way that we do that is we're going to say chmod. Now, this U specifies the user, and then the +X is to make this file executable as denoted by X. So hit that, and now when we run that same ls command, you can now see that it's executable here for the user. Now, I'm going to go ahead once again and do the ./, which indicates that we want to execute this file, and then the nvim.app image name, and you'll see that it opens, and it opens with what is 0.10.0, which is the latest stable version at the moment and the version that you want to be using. Of course, you can always check the documentation to see which is the most up-to-date version under latest. All right, so that's really great, but we don't want to have to go every time to that specific file and have to execute it. What we can do is we can expose this NeoVim globally, and we can do that by running this command. We actually have to do that as a super user. So we can do that with, I've already run that command, and if you, just as a trick, you can say sudo bang bang, and that's just going to execute the last line. Okay, and then we're going to move this app image into that opt and then NVim directory. So just for the record, let's have a look in there really quickly. ls opt NVim. We can see there's nothing in there. We're going to be putting this file nvim.appimage, which is here, this nvim app image, which is now executable. We're going to be putting it into that directory so that we can access it. Let's do that. When we use the move command, we provide the original file name, which is nvim.appimage, and then we can say the location that we want to send it to, which is opt/nvim, and then we want to create the name of we're renaming it essentially from nvim app image to nvim. Once again, permission denied. That was silly, but we know the trick that we can do sudo bang bang to repeat that line. And now if we look in our home directory, you'll see that that file's gone. Okay, however, if we go and we have a look into that opt/nvim directory, now there is this green, the green here denotes in my terminal emulator that is an executable file. Okay, but it's still not globally available for us, because if we were to say nvim, then it's going to say that we can't see this command. And so we actually need to make sure that the bash, our shell, is aware of this file and that it can execute it. So how do we do that? Let's go ahead and we're going to say, I'm going to use VI, which should be installed with this system, which is essentially a very, very basic version of what we're using with NeoVim. And I'm going to edit the .bash rc file. If you recall back in the beginning, I ran this command echo and then shell, and it told us that the shell that we're using is bash. Ordinarily I use ZSH, and I've got a video on how to set up ZSH, but for the moment bash is fine. So we can use VI and then go to the .bash rc file. And in here, I'm just going to hit G, because the instructions are add the following line. So it's okay to put that at the very bottom. And in here, I'm going to say export path equals path opt nvim. All this line is doing is taking your original path, which is where your system knows to look for these executable files and programs, and it's simply appending this new directory, which is opt/nvim, to say you can also look in here to see if there's any executables. Now we can now simply exit that with WQ, which is write and quit. And run this source command. So that just tells bash to refresh. Now if we were to run nvim, we can see, okay, that it is working. So I won't provide a dot, but we can see we've got NeoVim, and we didn't have to go to the specific file. We simply gave it this global variable name. We simply said nvim, and it executed this program, which is nvim version 0.10.0. So that's awesome. We've got it all set up for our next steps, which is our basic configuration with respect to our NeoVim. And in this tutorial, I'm just going to be taking you through a very basic setup for NeoVim, and then you can go ahead and you can customize that as you like, or you can also follow my other tutorial to install your LSPs and install your themes and everything to have a really nice environment. The point is that we're now at the point where we're operating using Ubuntu, and the tutorial that I alluded to earlier is all based on an Ubuntu system. So go ahead and check that out if it's interesting for you. Right, congratulations, you've installed the Windows Subsystem for Linux on your machine, and you've installed NeoVim. You can execute NeoVim by typing the nvim command, and that's going to execute it. And at the time of recording, this is the latest stable version. So that's the version that you'll be executing, or whatever app image that you downloaded from the NeoVim repository. We're very close now to concluding the introduction to NeoVim with WSL. The last thing that I want to touch on is that you will need a plugin manager. And one more little thing that I want to do before we get into that. Because I started using Vim a long time ago, before it was NeoVim, because NeoVim is a fork of Vim that builds on the original Vim project, I am used to using the Vim command. So I will often type in Vim. And maybe there's something that you'd like to type in as well. So what we're going to do rather is we're going to go to our bash rc, so nvim bash rc, and we're going to create an alias. I'm going to say alias and vim equals nvim, and then I'm going to say wq. Now it's important that you source your .bashrc file again, just to say that you've tell bash that you've updated it. So now when I run that command, it's going to open up Vim or NeoVim. And it's the same as just running NeoVim, but just I've got that habit. You can make it VI, you can make it whatever shortcut you would like. Now, that is an important point, because we've been editing the bashrc file, which is the dot file or configuration file for our bash shell, the born again shell. It's what that stands for. And so it was originally convention that dot files, these configuration files, would be placed in the user's home directory. So if you say ls and then -lah, you can see that we've got a few different dot files here. We've got a .ssh, we've got a .vim, which indicates that this Ubuntu system that I just installed came with some Vim configuration. Vim, the original Vim, looks like it was installed as part of that Ubuntu operating system that we installed. That's all well and good, but as of yet, we don't have a dot file configuration for NeoVim. And as I just mentioned, it was convention that with all of these files would be placed into the home directory, but this is considered kind of messy, and I feel like it is kind of disorderly. So now it's typically convention or better practice to put this into a .config directory. Now you may have a .config directory in here, but if you don't, you can simply make one with mkdir and then .config. And now you can change in here. And this will be your config directory for many of your Linux programs. They're going to look into this directory by default, and NeoVim is no exception to that. NeoVim is smart enough to look into this directory, and specifically what it wants to find is it wants to find a file or a directory called nvim. So let's create one. And we'll change directory into that. So we are in home, user, my username here is rad, and then .config and nvim. This is where NeoVim is going to look to have the basic configuration. Now on the left hand side, there is the most popular, the better or best plugin manager. There are plugin managers, other options available. They're all good, I'm sure, but this is the one that I use, and it is most likely the most popular in the ecosystem. It's called lazy.nvim. Of course, once again, this will be linked in the video description. It's a modern plugin manager, and it allows us to install things like themes and everything like that. Now, under installation here, I'm just going to copy this, and we're going to create a new file. It's going to be called init.lua. So let's go and do that. Remember, I've mapped Vim so that it will invoke NeoVim, and we're simply going to call that init.lua. I'm going to paste this in. This means that it's going to, when NeoVim is started, it's going to check to see if lazy.nvim is installed, and if not, it's going to go and get the latest stable version, and it's going to install it for us. And the next step down here is it needs to be set up. Now, I'm going to paste in that. So at the moment, these options, they're not defined and there's no plugins. So we need to fix that. There's some examples, and I'm also going to paste in these map leaders. If you're familiar with NeoVim or Vim, then you'll be familiar with the concept of a leader key, which is, in my case, I just use space. And as the final part of this tutorial, we have set up the plugin manager, and I'm going to help you to install a theme so that everything looks nice. Now, the theme that I'm going to install is Cappuccino, and the instructions are included in the repository. There's also, if you want to make it transparent, if you recall, I made this terminal emulator transparent. You'll also need to install this plugin, Transparent NeoVim by Xia Wang. So check these both out. I'm going to place these into the configuration now. And just so you can see it clearly, what I have provided is the local opts, and all that does, it installs the color scheme. And then down in plugins, we've first got this transparent NeoVim plugin, and then also Cappuccino, which is this theme that I've alluded to. And then importantly, on the very last line, just require this and pass in our options and our plugins. Now I'm going to exit out, and the next time that I open, say like the init.lua file, we're going to see that this color scheme has been applied, and of course it's transparent. So I'm going to exit this and then just give you the demonstration here. Okay, so you've got a color scheme applied, you've got NeoVim, you've got the WSL working. This is a great foundational setup. I'd encourage you to go ahead and check out my tutorial on setting up NeoVim from scratch. There's still a lot more work that you have to do in order to get this to a really nice developer environment. But nevertheless, this is set up, and I'd like to thank you for your time and watching this video.